right, welcome back to the Sean Trey Show. I have Alexander Lee-Rekers back with me, and we are going to continue our conversation from last time. Well, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. Yeah, very excited to be back. We had so many great things to talk about last time, so it's lovely to be able to continue that. I feel like just as soon as we got into it, it was over. So yeah, lovely to be back. Yeah.
We just that's the thing I'm starting to notice on these conversations. It's definitely, it flies by, and there's nowhere near enough time to kind of dive into everything. And you know, in general, conversations kind of just meander in ways, unless you're really wrangling it back in. And I don't necessarily want to kind of wrangle conversations at this point. But tell me a little bit more about what is your one of the things that people have been talking about a lot lately on the podcast is finding purpose and a purpose to their filmmaking and to their just creative process. And there was a great interview with Philip James McGoldrick that I did I don't know if you saw the one that went up yesterday, but he's an activist and filmmaker. And like, it is a core part of what he does is to make film that is, that is of meaning. And he's fundraising for a project called Born of Violence, and it's very powerful. I mean, it's for people who were conceived through a rape or an assault, and like as he was, and I didn't know that before he came on, and it was very powerful, passion project that he's working on, because it's happening around the world now. That's his. Other people could be working on something else. Someone could be. That's a heavier project, but someone could be doing a project called Life is Beautiful that they make a documentary of about positive, beautiful moments that they experience in their lives. It's just about where you want to go with it. Now, talk to me about your feeling on a life of purpose, a life of passion in these projects.
I think purpose is a really tough one, because I think purpose and passion are two very different things. And I think passion to me is it's a beautiful abstract that I think pushes a lot of us to create art and to pursue art and to live the artist's life, which at times is fraught and uncertain and can be wonderful and terrible all at once. I think purpose is something. From my own experience, purpose is something I look for in the work I create, but usually, if I have to look hard, it's probably not there. I think a lot about why I create. Particularly as a playwright, why I write something, because that's a question that I think you need to ask yourself. Does this need to exist? Does this need to be something that people hear about? And it's especially a question. I bring back my role as a teacher, as an educator, working with emerging playwrights, and especially playwrights who look like me, who are young white cis guys who go, do I have anything worthwhile to say? And I think that's a really great question to ask. I don't think just because you can open your mouth or put a pen to the paper, you should.
That's a good point.
I think the really important stories we tell, there's never a question of whether it's got a purpose or not. I think the purpose is there. Like the last piece that I wrote was examining the rise and the sanitization of fascism and far-right extremism in a country like Australia, which might not seem like the kind of place to give rise to that, but in so many ways, it's the perfect melting pot of racial tension and a very violent colonial history, all of these things leading into it, and a culture of apathy where people want comfort and will turn a blind eye to injustice. And it never occurred to me to kind of sit down and go, the purpose of this piece is really important. It's a really vital conversation to have. It became the thing I was passionate about creating. So I think purpose purpose is something we should be very aware of, but I also think it's something that when it's really there, when there's a reason for your art to exist, I don't think you question. It's like being in love. It's if you're in love with someone, then you know that that's the truth. You don't have to think about it. It's just kind of the thing that takes you through the day. So I think purpose is a really important thing. I think you should always ask yourself, why am I creating? What's the merit of the thing I am creating?
And it also leads to the question of, does every project need to be this project that is like this world-changing project, or can you write stuff that's just fun? You know what I mean? Does every film need to be that thing that forces people to ask questions? Every film or play, I tend to enjoy projects that do have a theme, have a message, but or simply explore a topic. Because maybe I was watching the movie Parasite recently, and I don't know if there's per se a message in that movie, but it does explore a theme. This one group of parasites that think they're taking advantage of this family, but in reality, there is a second, much more, insidious parasite that's already existing there. You know what I mean? And it's like, these are things that I question. What's your perspective?
Yeah, message, I think, is almost a weaponized term at times when it comes to, it's something we feel is got to be a tangible part of what that art is. I feel like the best art doesn't force you to ask questions. You can't help but to do that. You can't help but to make those connections and to realize that all along you've been all along you've kind of been tricked into thinking about things that you might never have thought were pertinent, and suddenly, I guess, fairy tales, fables are great examples of this. We learn, truths, and we learn, important lessons as children by being told stories. And the moral of the story is, yes, it might be there, but sometimes you don't need the moral of the story to know that the woods are deep and dark and scary, or not to trust the wolf. And I think that's what art does so well, is that it actually gives us the opportunity to explore difficult topics in a way that makes them entertaining. I agree with you completely. I think it's not every piece of art has to be deep and dark to have a profound truth or a profound beauty. In fact, I think the best, some of the best and most persuasive pieces of art are comedies, are the lighter things, because in that space, I think people are at their most persuasive. Yeah. So I think I'd opt to say that art needs to have a message each time, but I think in the telling of that there is so much, in the execution of that for the artist, there is so much to be said for. This is entertainment. This is something people have to engage and enjoy. If you traumatize somebody, if you shock them, they shut down and their brains stop receiving those messages. So I think it's so important to nurture an audience and bring them into that experience. And you'll have a better chance at changing their minds if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, 100%. And this is something I was talking to my wife about yesterday, because we were talking about how she's planning a new show. And for this show, she's doing it through music. But one of the concepts that we were looking at is to try to express, getting people to start thinking about some topics that might not be the easiest to process, And one of the things is, like, we were starting to look at, and I've been working with her on how do you conceptualize the patriarchy for a culture that is deeply patriarchal, and people, it's like, how do you get the fish to comprehend water? You know what I mean? Yeah. And like, because that's us, we are living in this tank of water. And sometimes, you're like, what do you mean air? It's like, it's like, what do you mean wet? And when we were talking about this, we were sitting there, and like, one of the things that both of us realized is that if you make a topic abrasive, sometimes it's hard to comprehend. Sometimes it's like, but this sandpaper is good for you, and versus a comedy, at times has a way of having the exact same strong concepts, but it comes through in a way that's much less abrasive. And because you don't always, even though we do need to create action, even though we are looking to get people involved in finding solutions, sometimes you got to make them just wake up first. You know what I mean? And there was one of the best examples I've ever had of that is when I went to see a play by Aristophanes done in Berkeley. It was The Birds. And, I was like, I had no way to relate to some of the themes in Aristophanes. The Birds, I was like, this is a, several thousand-year-old play, and I'm trying to approach it and comprehend it. But, like, they actually turned it into this amazing work of satire and comedy by popping modern political figures into the play. And it was some very tongue-in-cheek characters that they were kind of doing, but they made some amazing points. From something that was absolutely out of reach, they made it accessible by adding comedy.
And I think it's something lovely, especially about theatre, that I find that for thousands of years we have been asking ourselves the same questions, and some of these questions we might be able to even answer these days. I couldn't think of one on the top of my head, but the idea is that we are united over the world throughout history by wanting these topics to be explored and vocalized and shown. I think that's why, personally, having worked across different media, I think I find myself drawn to theatre in particular because it is, in a sense, it's kind of an eternal art form. It's always dying, depending on who you ask or what article you read in the paper. But it's always got this idea of kind of bringing people really interesting concepts and ideas and thoughts and emotions through centuries, through millennia. And to me, that's a beautiful thing to behold and a beautiful thing to be part of.
Excuse me. Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that as an actor, I think theater is kind of real acting. You know what I mean? And not that film acting is not real, but like, let's be real. With a movie, you got time, you're focusing on that one scene. But when you're doing theater, you've had to invest how many months beforehand to memorize pages and pages and pages of dialogue. And there's no winging it. I mean, it really is this amazing act of endurance, of mental endurance to be able to remember all of that, And
absolutely, yeah. It's I mean, as somebody who's not an actor, and the thought of being on a stage or in front of a camera terrifies me. I have such profound respect for people who step into that lion's den and watch the way that they can bring these thoughts to life. And the thought, as you say, an actor sitting in a sustained performance for sometimes hours on end in front of people, and not with that remove of being on camera and having it sent away and watched, and which in its own way is a beautiful dance.
Take two,
absolutely.
Take three.
It's getting it right on the night. It's getting it perfect on the night, or whatever that form of perfect is. And it is that living, breathing thing. I mean, the last show that I did, watching the actors evolve these characters, and also, I think something we spoke about last time is the opportunity to work with actors in developing a work, developing a text, and that's a singular thing, I think, for plays, just by way of different budgeting and different time structures. Those months are so beautiful and so valuable to be able to work with actors on getting them to own that text and getting them to own that story.
Right. There was a great when COVID first hit, the National Theatre in London, the British National Theatre, was airing a ton of their recorded plays for free. They would have them up for a week. I think they stopped. I don't know if they're still doing it. I know they have stuff in archive that you can have a subscription for. But they had this play, Frankenstein. And Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but an adaptation of Frankenstein. I don't think it was the original, the original. I mean, originally it was a book, but it was an adaptation of the story of Frankenstein. But the cool thing was that they had Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster played by two actors, who for 1 week played. This actor was Dr. Frankenstein, and this person was the monster. And then the next week they flipped it.
Wonderful.
And so the other person played the monster, and the other person played Frankenstein, which was so interesting to see. And it was Benedict Cumberbatch was one of the people.
Great.
And the other guy was Jason something from Boondock Saints. The actor, you don't see him in TV much anymore.
No,
but still a phenomenal actor, and he was doing theater. He's doing mainly theater now.
Yeah,
and so yeah,
I love that. I mean, it reminds me of the story. I don't know how real on it was, but the story was for Philip Seymour Hoffman and John C. Reilly when they were doing their production of True West, the Sam Shepard play. They would swap the roles every few weeks, and as the story goes, and I'll tell it because it's far better than the truth could ever be, they would flip a coin some nights, and they go, "All right, that's who we play tonight." And I think it's that connection to a text that actors have, especially with theatre, that is so wild, because it's not just their lines. It is that entire story, that entire world, and those people. And I find myself, I'm very interested in making big theatre. I think so much of what we do, especially in Australia, is very safe in terms of having a couple of people on stage, and I call them sofa plays. There's a sofa in the middle of the room, and that's like the main feature of the set, and it's all living room. It's very small stuff, and to me, I want to burn the sofa and put lots of actors on stage and have them play hundreds of roles, and the piece spans years. I like kind of epic theatre in that sense, I'm drawn to those kind of large themes where actors have to grapple not just with a character, but with a story, with a world. Because I find that when I'm transported into a world as an audience member, and sometimes it can just be with one person. I mean, I think one of the greatest pieces of theatre. I watched a lot of lockdown streamed theatre. As you mentioned with the National Theatre, I watched the Encounter by Simon McBurney with the Complicité Theatre Company, which was him on a stage with a bunch of microphones, ASMR mics and binaural mics, all these sort of things. And the audience were all wearing headphones, and he would speak as he would into your ear and create sound effects and record. And it was one person, but it was like a symphony. And it was just the most fascinating thing to watch this person bring all of these disparate elements together. And you get that sense of an actor as the facilitator of a story, not just the person pretending to be somebody else. They take us into this world, and I think an actor is as much an actor as they are a prop or a part of the scenery or a part of the lighting. They've got this kind of beautiful central role that ties it all together. And of course, there's all of that in film as well. I mean, film is a wonderful collaborative art, but to see it all sort of work together like clockwork on a stage I think there's just nothing quite like it. It's a wonderful thing.
I 100% agree. And I will say that I make it sound like I'm this huge theater aficionado, and yes, I agree. I am terrified of theater. I am terrified as an actor of theater, because for the longest time I have the hardest time with learning lines, and so my dream someday is to do a large play, whatever that might be, and to terrify myself even more, make it Shakespeare or something. But I think that I would actually. I don't necessarily have. I've never had a pull towards Shakespeare, and I don't know why. I think it's more. I like colloquial speaking. I like the modern, and just for me, because I always felt Shakespeare was spoken English at the time. Shakespeare was like modern speech, and I feel like Shakespeare has been at times inaccessible for me, just because I'm like jumping over to a dictionary every 5 words. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not a problem, but my dream to overcome some of my fears would be to be in a large, big theater like that where there's something like Hamilton. I know that's more of a musical number, but like to be surrounded by a bunch of actors on stage with costumes and costume changes, like that to me is petrifying.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. But I saw, I think Hamilton was the last show I saw here in Australia before shutdown, because there was a time when Hamilton was one of the only, the Australian production was the only one in the world for a while, before our brilliant scheme of not vaccinating anybody came home to roost. And I remember going to see that, and I'd seen the Disney Plus version. I'd seen that, and I'd listened to the music, and I thought, great show, really interesting. It wasn't until I sat down in the theater and watched it all come together that I went, oh, this is like breathtaking. It was so wonderful to see that happen, and to be reminded of what theater can be. As an example, something I watched recently was I was given a copy of the Lehman Trilogy, which was another National Theatre production, which I think is just about to open on Broadway. With two of the original cast and a new person. And that was something I've been told about. I think it's a few years old now, and it's the 180-something year history of the Lehman Brothers Bank, who were instrumental in the global financial crisis, and it all came crashing down in 2008. And the story of three Jewish immigrants in Alabama starting a little shop and then eventually becoming a bank that destroyed the world. And that was with three actors on stage the entire time and a pianist sitting in the corner like they were accompanying a silent film. And it was just the most breathtaking thing to watch. It was so beautiful. It was so gripping. 3-hour runtime, and yet it was the tightest piece I'd ever seen. It
3
felt like
hours.
It felt 20 minutes long. It was the minute it started, it was over, and suddenly you were in World War I, and then suddenly you were in 1976, and these three performers played fathers and sons, husbands and wives. They played children from 6 till 86. It was just the most incredible piece of work. I mean, it's that kind of thing, and I think it hit differently in lockdown, because you start to miss the process of creation. And in terms of where I'm at with my career at the moment, I had 2 shows on this year, and I was very, very lucky to have them both produced before Australia shut down, and is still shut down, of course. So I'm at the point now where I am starting to look at the next projects. I've got a lot of blank pages in front of me and a lot of projects that I want to start looking at. And it's very easy in lockdown, I think, to forget that we were all working. We were all chasing that hustle, and suddenly it stops and we go, oh, it feels like so long since we've created. But I've had 2 shows produced this year. That's unheard of, and it's wonderful, and I'm very grateful for that. But then you watch something like the Lehman Trilogy and you go, oh God, I've got to create something again. What am I doing sitting here?
It raises the bar, man. When you see a great show like that, it's just
absolutely. And I had the added experience of people saying that this is such a kind of thing that you would write. I go, awesome. For God's sake, I'd love to. Right. I think that's very kind, but it's this incredible kind of thing, and it was so the style that I love and emulate, and it was one of those moments where that's what I mean. I should send this to critics who didn't quite get what I was going for. It's like, take your point, absolutely, but this is what I was shooting for. Maybe that helps. I don't know. Yeah.
I want to, but that kind of segues nicely into something that I really did want to talk about last time that we didn't get a chance of. Talk to me about your writing process.
Absolutely.
I want to, for people that are, watching, that might be like aspiring playwrights, aspiring, screenwriters. How do you approach? So well, first of all, how do you find a topic? I mean, that might be the first place to start at.
Well, I think this comes back really nicely to what we were talking about when it comes to the purpose, because I have a terrible time planning a topic. And I've been spoiled enough to be paid for what I do, so writing on spec, writing for free is a real chore to me these days. Obviously, I still have to do it because that's the nature of what we do. So I can find it very difficult to start in a topic. But when it comes to those topics, the purpose, the things that feel important, it's never really a consideration. So I've got things that I'm passionate about. I've got things that I want to explore. I try to think about what would translate really well and to what medium as well. I think, you ask yourself, you're writing a play, does this have to be a play? Should it be a film? Should it be a podcast? Should it be... I hope it's not a painting because I can't paint, but it's that kind of question to ask.
Yeah.
So I start with a topic that I'm passionate about, and then I try to think about the most interesting way to tell that. I think the most affected I've ever been in a theatre was I was 15 years old and I saw this 8-hour production. It was an adaptation of Ovid's Metamorphoses, and the first part of that piece was just somebody coming out on stage and telling the story of Phaeton and the
Wow.
chariot crashing into the earth, and it was just an actor sitting on the stage telling stories, and I went, this is what theatre should be. So I try to think about telling that story, and then from there, we go into the drafting process. And I'm a terrible procrastinator when it comes to my own creative work. I mean, I can hit a deadline with the best of them when it comes to somebody else's pitch or commission or work. Mm-hmm. When it comes to mine, I will sit there for months on end until eventually I churn something out. So I struggle with a first draft, but then what I've learned to do, and I think we talked about this last week, I really focus now on the collaborative process. So working with people that I trust and people that I respect to help me find those ideas and to articulate the things that I'm trying to say. So I guess, ideas come from wherever they come from. Sometimes it's an interesting topic. As I said, fascism was one of the things I wanted to talk about. And I wrote a play about that and wrote what I saw, and then I had the surreal experience of watching the Capitol stormed in the US and going, I have to rewrite the end of the play because real life has eclipsed what the fantasy is. So, having these moments, and that was a strange experience because, everything was so relevant, and I kept seeing things that I'd write and they'd pop up in the news, writing about far-right rallies in small country towns, and then suddenly this footage emerged of Nazis in a national park here in Australia, and like my grandfather lived under occupation in Europe during World War II, and it's so wild to me that Nazis are not just Indiana Jones villains, as I grew up thinking they were. They were a real thing, and they became a concept, and now they're a real thing again. And I find that I feel like I failed my grandfather. Going, we didn't take this seriously, and they're back. I'm really sorry. It's like cockroaches after you don't spray out of the fridge or something. I've gone off on a lot of tangents here. So ideas I find where I can. And then for me, it's a collaborative drafting process. So I'm very lucky. I work with my partner is a director. We have a theatre company together, and something I'd love to chat to you about, working with your significant other and that process, because that is it's something that for a lot of people simply does not work. That's a real distinction they don't want to make. But we work with one another. They're a very accomplished director. They do amazing work, and in terms of helping me with my writing and the ideas and things, that's a really important part of the process to me. So these days my advice to writers, my process is bring people in. Don't be afraid of asking for opinions, for help. Learning to navigate feedback is its own challenge, and letting go of defensiveness and insecurity. But I find that usually it's a really helpful thing. Even if you walk into a room and 10 people tell you 10 useless pieces of advice, you go, well, they're all speaking for a reason. Nobody came in here and said how much they loved it. So maybe even if their advice is terrible, there is a gap there they're at least identifying. And I think that's something that I'll struggle and refine until I'm very, very old and can't hold a pen anymore.
Well, and I think that's a good point, because I'm actually in the process of I feel like I'm looking at with this project. I'm really enjoying it. I'm actually really enjoying this. I find this exceptionally fun. And in my mind, I'm beginning to conceptualize how I could grow what I'm working on. And so I still like this idea. And I haven't seen lots of people doing kind of what I'm doing globally. I mean, I've seen probably, in the US, you get these people who go do short little exposés on people locally, but it's always very local. It's never, the larger world, and maybe that's a cost thing. I don't know. But I like this idea, and I'm looking at that. But I'm also in the space of like, well, at some point in time, I'm going to have to look for partners to help me grow it, whether that be a financial investment, whether that be conceptually, whether that be a new agent or a manager that comes in and just gives me advice. And, one of the things that I don't like is I have a real challenge with people trying to slow me down because people might have the best of intentions, but sometimes I've been producing one of these a day. And when people ask me why so many, I'm like, because it's an algorithm game. And, and like it or not, I've been, the first couple I posted, and my numbers aren't great yet. But the thing is like the internet, it keeps working. Like that content stays working for you. You know what I mean? And so
absolutely,
it just keeps going when you have stuff up. Well, I'm kind of circling around on a tangent, but the idea that I'm looking at is I might not like the advice that some of these people have for me. Say I bring in a new agent or investor or manager, but yet by simply collaborating with them, if I can find someone who's knowledgeable, who has a great perspective on these things, a producer who's done stuff like this, we have to condition ourselves to listen. We have to condition ourselves to take feedback. Doesn't mean we have to do it. It doesn't mean that we have to agree on every point, but we should hear it because people's perspectives have been informed by their own journey, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a very tough thing when art is so subjective. And yet, such an important part of it is opinion, is criticism, is the climate around. You've got the artist and the audience, but then there is the art world. There are the critics. There is the system that you have to engage with, and in some ways, that's the part we all want to burn to the ground. And
right,
I've read reviews of my work, and I felt that very much, but. It's, I think, really important that we are growing that discourse. And I think, constantly reinventing and becoming a part. I think what I really admire about the work you're doing, Sean, is that you are finding that boundary between artist and art worlds, between the artist as somebody who creates things to be consumed, and the facilitator, the producer, the entrepreneur, the hustler, if you will, that creates new ideas and new thoughts. And I think something I wanted to ask you, thinking about what you've been doing is. What is your perception of yourself? I mean, if I ask you to define Sean Trace, what is that? What is that? Is that a brand? Is that an artist who does podcast? Is it a podcast who acts? How do you see yourself now in terms of being a multidisciplinary figure?
And that's something that I've been looking at. And I was, honestly, I'm a storyteller. Like, that's where it comes from. Whether I'm doing music, whether I'm doing a podcast, whether I'm writing screenplays, I'm a storyteller. But my storytelling always has a theme. There's always a goal. There's always something I'm trying to teach. So I would take a step back beyond storyteller to I'm a teacher. I'm an educator. And I'm a gifter of ideas. And to me, because I don't necessarily want to, with the education, to coerce, because I feel like so much education is coercive. You know what I mean? I want to impart ideas. and allow people to come to their own conclusions. And I don't know, but that's still also very esoteric. So, what am I, if I were to like, because, your question's also very marketability type thing, well, how are you sizing up your brand, and I've been looking at that because I started this podcast with music and film, but you know what? The followers that I'm getting are actually much more music oriented. And I've been having a lot of people pop on for music, and I'm not gonna. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna just be like, oh, forget this. I'm gonna dive. But it is interesting that there is. I feel like music might be more accessible to some people. That there might be. I feel like there's more people doing it as well. You know what I mean? And so as I'm looking at this, and I think the best point that I'm making with this is my wife, I consider a singer and musician. For myself, I love music. I grew up singing, but I have had a hard time identifying as a songwriter, as a musician. And I've always felt like a hobbyist. But, when I've been, doing music professionally with my wife for, 6 years now. So why can't I consider myself a musician? You know what I mean? And so it's interesting. And I've been circling back around that. But there is one challenge though, because I'm like, well, what if I got this podcast off the ground and it became a big thing? I don't want to be forced to give up my music or to be forced to give up my acting. You know what I mean? Like, I really want to be able to have those things in my writing. So I'm trying to find a way to define myself that encompasses all of them, that I can be a filmmaker and also have a show and also do these other things. And granted, if this ever got so big that I was forced to step back from other things, well, that's probably a good problem to have. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
An internationally syndicated show, that's a good problem to have, But for right now, I still feel like I'm coming back, and the fundamental essence of what I'm doing is to try to facilitate ideas, to try to kind of just plant seeds, I think maybe that's not what you were looking for. But.
No. I think because I think we're all in flux in terms of finding what that identity is. Right. I think so much of searching for the legitimacy of being an artist is about owning the thing that you are. At what point do you call yourself, I'm this, I'm a musician, I'm an actor, I'm a writer? And I think there are different contexts where different answers are, perhaps more relevant than others, in the same way that we have, a creative CV and a professional CV sometimes, or, something that blurs the two, I remember when I was at drama school and studying writing, how validating it was to be called a writer just every day.
Yeah.
I think the best thing that I got out of that place, and I had a great time there, and I know some people didn't have as great a time as me. The best thing I got was my teacher referring to us as colleagues, whether he walked into a room, whether he sent us an email, whether he introduced us. There was that idea that you're in the industry right now, and I'm a writer and you're a writer too. How lovely. And that's great. And I think it's a really important thing to empower people with. That said, especially in a conservatory model, a place that is looking to package you and send you out there, and this was an institution where their reputation is tied up in that of the graduates and their output. So they help you along, because if frankly speaking, if you fuck up, it looks like they fucked up. I think watching how I was being very gently packaged as one thing was probably damaging. In fact, it's something that my teacher actively tried to work against, in terms of, he was saying that this should be a film directing course. And now, of course, I go back and I teach film history and criticism and filmmaking there. Every year I go and deliver a course talking about these issues. And what I do when I get in the room, well, we might watch Jean-Luc Godard, but then we'll sit there and go, all right, here's what you need to do. Don't just define yourself as one thing. You need to define yourself as the sum of the parts that you are. Because even just being in a building like that, that becomes your identity. Your identity becomes the thing. And I think that's ultimately reductive and really scary, because we start to, I would never call myself a musician, but I studied classically for 20 years. I play every single day. I've got countless instruments in this room behind me, much like yourself in your frame there. But it doesn't define the kind of art I create. I mean, for me, exactly. I made a choice to go, this is a hobby. This is the thing I enjoy. It's a thing I can love. And if I'm very honest with you, when I do professional sound and music work, for me, that's a chore. That's probably the biggest part of my process. That's a chore. I do a couple of sound design gigs a year for people I really like, for people I really enjoy. So that I'm pitching a production for next year with my company Ratcatch Theatre, and I'm going to sound design that because it sounds fun. It sounds really interesting, and also it's a cost cutting measure. If I'm producing, I can fill that role too. Nice. But for me, music is that's an unwind thing. That's something I listen to or I do to relax. And I think that's another really important part of the journey, is that you've got to learn when you do the thing for yourself, when you enjoy the thing for yourself. And I think the more you can do that, the more you can find a way to switch that off and just enjoy it, is really nice. I struggle at times listening to... when I do sound design and music, I thought, why am I finding this such a chore to do? Why am I finding this so difficult to sit down and work on? And I realized at some point it's the only job that I have ever done where I can't listen to music while I'm doing it. I mean, if I'm working in a shop where I'm, unloading a truck or something, I can have headphones on. I can have music on in the background at a radio somewhere. Even if I'm writing, I can do that. If I'm teaching, I can put music on in the classroom. The total silence I need to actually create that bothers me. It makes me feel really strange. So, I think finding those different facets of your process are really, really important. And I think something you talk about branding as well, and I think that's another consideration that artists are told in so many ways that we are not important members of society, that we don't contribute something, and that's a whole other argument. But I think that at times negatively impacts what an artist thinks they can do and offer. And what they have to offer, in a sense. This is an unpopular opinion, perhaps, but I think that artists should be producers, should be entrepreneurs, should be people that do look at how they can support their career and sell a ticket at times. Now, that's not always the case and shouldn't always be the focus, but I think, there are so many artists are, such hard workers. I think, consider this and find your reputation as people who are pursuing, stability in your career. Because if we don't take ourselves seriously, nobody else will. The image of artists as people who sit at home on government benefit. I don't know an artist I don't know an actor who doesn't work at least 2 jobs and then does a play on the side and a short film that weekend. Like, they are the hardest working people in the world. I don't know how we keep getting this reputation for being lazy, people looking for a handout who can't make a buck. Like, we've got to do some damage control there, because these people deserve to be respected, and they are hard work, and you will get results if you invest in them.
Well, and that was you made a point. I want to touch on one thing and the other. Like, when I lived in LA, there was a stigma to telling people you were an actor. It's like, oh, you're one of those guys who pipe dreams, right? And you're like, wow, that's kind of rough. But I want to come back to another thing and touch on it real quick with the branding and such. I feel like one of the most important things for me, I'm a storyteller, right? And one of the things that I searched for and looked at was, I think as an artist, one of the most important things you must do is to find your platform. Because if you don't have a place that you can share your ideas, let's make an analogy, right? You are a playwright, but it's 200 years ago, and you are trying to put on plays inside of a coffee shop, or not a coffee shop, a saloon in the Old West. Well, one of the most important things to do is to build your stage. Whether that is and in modern times, we might not be building a stage, but you might still need to build your audience. You still might need to build, and that's was one of the things I was telling my wife. Like, if I can build out my podcast and get a million subscribers, 100,000 subscribers, 10,000, and then I'm putting my music out there too. Well, it just complements the fact that I'm building a platform. Put my short films up. It doesn't have to be that I have one outlet of storytelling. You can have multiple things if that's what you want to do, but you still have to build your platform. You still have to build the arena that you're releasing content in. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. And that's part of the brand building for an artist. It's like who you are and where you're putting things out is really important.
And I'd go further to say that it's really important to diversify. It's really important to actually build up. I mean, great to consider yourself as one thing. And I think a lot of that's tied to the legitimacy of being seen as a professional, because you get a job of one thing and you get paid for one thing. And that's a very old way of thinking, I think. And it keeps us in our lanes. I'd recommend every actor should write. I think every actor should direct. Yes. I myself am currently looking, lockdown makes it slightly difficult, but I'm currently looking at acting classes. Nice. Not because I want to, burst into a screen in Hollywood, but because I want to experience what I spend so much time, working with and coaching and teaching. I think it's really important to have that experience.
It's terrifying.
And I am terrified. It doesn't help that my mother is an acting teacher. So I've been in acting classes my entire life. Every time I made my bed, I was in an acting class, I feel. But having these experiences, I think diversifying is so important. I remember a great quote I took with me straight out of high school. I went into a brand new program at our National Film School, and so much of it was about the internet and about marketing across media platforming and that sort of thing. And to us, it was like, oh, really? This is boring. I wanted to make films. Now so much of that teaching is so important. It's wild. Right. And this is in a time before streaming, before Netflix, before any of this. And I remember being told this great quote, which was saying audiences are no longer hundreds of audiences of thousands. They're thousands of audiences of hundreds. And what you need to do is you need to reach all of those different platforms. And sometimes it's not the same piece of work. Sometimes it's something different, but then how exciting is that? How exciting is it that you've got to go, I've got this thing I want to talk about. I've got to find a new way to tell it, a new and exciting way to...
One of my favorites for that. Sorry,
yeah. No, please. I'll jump back in.
One of my favorites for that, and granted, he's not the greatest thespian, but I feel like he's probably the greatest at what he does, is Dwayne Johnson. All right, well, what do I mean? Like, The Rock understands that every last thing he does in the public eye is brand building, is part of his thing. So his Instagram supports his films, which support his our other endeavors. He's got Zoa now, which is his energy drink. He's got his tequila that he's constantly marketing, and it's the point being, whatever he does with his brand is his thing, but he perfectly understands his brand, and he's a masterclass in understanding your brand.
And I really think that there is merit in embracing the dark side and something like that, to go. Because I know some wonderful artists in my life who I just watch them and I say, play the game. Like, just step up a little bit and you're going to have a voice and you can change things. I think it's really, really important. And it's...
Create the platform, create the space so that you can then go and tell people because if you are clinging to your principles So much so, I hate the system. I hate this. I might not like everything built in intrinsically into the system, but I have to know how to navigate it and get to the point where then I can help be a force for change.
Absolutely. And it's a tough thing to see, because I think we're in an era where so much of the dirty laundry is being aired. And I think it's a fantastic thing. I worry about the artists who are going to be
turned off by it, or
who are going to be discouraged of entering that system, because those are the ones I think are most apt at dismantling it. And ultimately, that's I think there's huge changes that need to happen, and it's not going to be people like me who are going to be on top. And I think that's great. I think the time for a change. I remember thinking I was teaching film when the Harvey Weinstein scandal, happened, when the story broke, and looking at that, and I was thinking at the time about how Harvey Weinstein was such a champion of foreign films in America. And I remember thinking it'll be really interesting to see what we get in America in terms of foreign cinema and how that's kind of mainstream and popularized. And of course, the result was not a dirge of content. It was this renaissance, this beautiful explosion. Parasite happened the year after that, and you go,
right.
The person I actually used to think was the gatekeeper in terms of helping these things along was actually the blockage.
Right.
And I think it's going to be one of those situations where time and time again, we're actually going to see this wonderful renaissance of content and diversity and storytelling, where I think so many people in power and in part of those systems are scared that it's just going to mean that nothing will happen. I think more and more is going to happen. There's a strange instance, I think, of survivor bias there, where we go, look, it's been fine so far, or we've got to be very careful.
Right.
It's like, no, we need to crack it wide open.
We have all of these roles that we play, and let's take it back to something as simple as your own brand. Like, we don't have to make it, these earth-shaking changes. You can look at something very simple of what happens if I define myself as a singer-songwriter? What happens if that's part of my persona? You know what I mean? It's something that I haven't included, but what if that is something that I include? What if I do define myself as an educator? I for years worked as a teacher as I was trying to pursue my artistic endeavors. And then there was a time recently, and I resented it, because I wanted to be doing just my creative stuff. And then there was a point recently where I thought about it, and they're like, people asked, what do you do? And I was like, I've been a film producer for a long time, and a director and an actor and a teacher. And then all of a sudden it clicked to me that was like, hang on, I'm still teaching. I've been teaching all along with these other things as well. It's just the format has changed. And that's what you got to do, is you have to reframe this stuff.
Go ahead. I was going to say, did you find, it's very much the culture in Australia, is teaching the default fallback position for a creative person?
I think so.
That was your experience, because here we're told, you want to be an actor, cool. You want to be a writer, cool. Well, get your teaching degree, have something to fall back on.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of actors and a lot of creatives, it's by default, it seems like the failure job. It's like, being a wait, being wait staff, working in hospitality. It's like, there's something to this that's the stereotype that I really hate. But I'm proud to call myself a teacher, and my teaching, the last 2 weeks I have taught from the ages of 7 years old, doing short filmmaking, to high school students, to undergrads and actors, all the way to postgrads working on master's theses. Awesome. It's a huge range of people. And I don't like a term like lecturer. I don't like a term like academic. Teacher, that's what you do. You give knowledge to people. And I think and I think teaching is so tied, because we are all in some sense educators as creatives, as you say. To tell a story is to share an experience, to share an idea with somebody else. And at the end of the day, that is, to be totally reductive, exactly what we do. And I talk to students about this, and I say, there are going to be times where you're going to have to spell it out, especially for people in the industry who have great intentions but no knowledge of perhaps, modern discourse and identity politics and things. Like, yes, they're going to be behind the 8 ball and it's going to suck because you're going to have to keep spelling things out for them. But isn't it wonderful you're in a position where you're able to make a difference and make a connection and have somebody listen to you and be heard? Like, it's a wonderful thing to teach and have that responsibility. And I firmly believe that it makes us better artists on the other side of that, because we take those skills of whether it's articulation or it's just the knowledge we accrue, and we can put that into our work and be more persuasive, because you've got to have your shit together when you teach. You can't foyer talk students.
There was a quote that I used to keep, through teaching we learn. And one of the things that I see is when I teach something, I understand it on a deeper level than I ever understood it when I just studied it. And I think, and I don't know why that is, but I do believe that I like that. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, that we are all, we're all educators. And I think that if an actor, a creative can embrace that, I think that that's part of the game, because whether you embrace it or not, you're spreading a message. And isn't it better to at least know what that message is that you're putting out there?
Absolutely. I think one of the scary things about what we do is if you don't have the message in mind, people will put their own on. And that can be, that's beyond art. That's PR 101. If you don't tell the story, someone will control that narrative. And I think that leads so nicely back to what we started with today, which is purpose. You've got to have a purpose for why you create. And I think you can create for joy, you can create for love, and you can create something that is meant to delight and entertain. But I think purpose at some point for us becomes an inherent part of the process. Something inspires us to create. My writing teacher at NIDA used to say, whatever you are concerned with, whatever you write, will to some degree be the thing that you've been worried about, you've been exploring. He would say, don't plan, don't make any notes on paper, don't do post-it notes on the wall, just start writing, and you will find the things that concern you, the things that excite you and anger you will be there on the page. And when I was studying, I wanted to write a feature screenplay because I'd never written one before, and I thought, I'm going to write the biggest, wildest script I can, just to see if I can, and then everything else will feel better by comparison. And I remember reading this thing, which was like a Coen Brothers, Michael Bay hybrid, and going through and going, wow, this is actually speaking to some really personal issues, despite it being full of some strange themes and wild scenes and giant budget stuff I could never make. I actually touched upon my concerns about being an artist, being a person, things like job stability, relationship with family, with fathers, that sort of stuff. All these kind of things were there, and I had no idea. I thought, oh wow, I actually, I wrote something that was oddly profound, if only to me. And I think that's what we do when we create art. Hence my idea of purpose is important, but I think you don't need to search for it. I think it will find you. And that's a very comforting thought for me on a dark day.
Well, on that note, we'll finish up, man. I really appreciate that.
Always a pleasure, mate. Thank you so much.